Cybersecurity questions. It would be nice if I take the mic off mute. Once again, if you got any cybersecurity questions or just tech questions, just put them in the box. You see it in this 800-53R5. I'll do a little GRC today. We're going to focus on, I should have put it up in there, configuration management. If you looked at the other videos, there's 20 families. The two I think most comes up in audit, especially deep dive into documentations are onboarding, offboarding, and the other one we were looking at was incident response is huge. So how long you taking, what you're gonna do, and the other one is configuration management. So we're just gonna talk about it at a high level. Once again, if you got any questions, just drop them in the box, and we're gonna get started. Rough day for me, but it's all good. So, and I'll put the link in there. There's a document. It's I think it's 700 pages. In this documentation, we talk about federal compliance, how we do it at a high level. So that's one reason when I talk about GRC, one of the big drivers of that, especially in Fed and companies that work with federal space, is NIST. So once again, it's this NIST 800-53 provides a catalog of security and privacy controls for all United States federal information systems. It's published by NIST, National Institute of Standard and Technology, which is a non-regulatory agency of the United States Department of Commerce. NIST developed issue standard guidelines and other publications for federal agencies. It's for the Modernization Act of 2014, which is FISMA. So a lot of times you hear people talk about NIST, FISMA, CMC, DOD, all that's kind of that federal soup of things that's happening. So once again, we're just gonna just kind of go over it, especially from a configuration management standpoint. Here's our 20 security families from a NIST perspective, R5. Now we're talking about security programs, right? A lot of times when you deal with people, especially on the internet, shout out to them, they talk about stovepipe. We're talking about Active Directory. We're talking about Azure. We're talking about AWS. We're talking about Windows, right? We're talking about Oracle, SQL Server, right? Those are stoves. We're talking about how do you manage a program for a company doing federal work or trying to get federal work, right? So these are the 20 families that covers those security controls for, once again, for an R5, right? So access control, awareness training, physical environment, right? So today we're going to focus on CM, configuration management. And once again, what does that look like? In the configuration management, at the top you see low, medium, moderate, and high. Right. So depending on your level of company or what level you want to be at, these are the configuration management controls you need to have implemented. Right. Of course, low is going to be the least, moderate is going to be medium, and high, right, is usually life or death. Right. You talk about nuclear space program stuff where people can get deleted. So these are the controls you need to operate, right? So a lot of times people ask me, if you're a small company or you just starting, just implement the lows. You see them right there. It's not a lot of them, right? But for configuration management, just implement the lows. Then the following year, you can do half the highs. Then even if you're moderate, you want to start doing some of the high level security. Why would you want to do that? Because people are getting attacked every day, hacked every day. I try to do just a regular intrusion incident response video of everyday people getting hacked, right? So I do one every other day, right? That's why you need to get as high, as many security controls on as you can get, because the higher you get up on the attack, right? Script kiddies, nation state, right? There's a lot of things in between, but the more controls you have, the better, right? And shout out to you. And it's not linear, right? The more money you add, right, you don't get exponentially better. It starts to curve off. Like your first 25 is cool. Your next 25 is right. You probably only get half the security that you got for the first 25 on your second 25, right? So security is not infinite. So let's look at some of these controls from a moderate. Like we already know you need policies and procedures, baseline configuration, right? What's your baseline is pretty much what do you have active, what do you have in production. So you should be able to take your baseline, right, and audit it to make sure that's what you have in production. This is the image you have on your laptops. This is the image you have on your Linux boxes, right? All of that needs to be a baseline configuration, right? Because if you need to go back to a revision or you need to do some investigation on the revision, you need to have a baseline config of what that is, right? Configuration change control. When you change stuff, right? Is that a ticket, service ticket, incident ticket? You need a ticket in to track your controls, right? So you can see why something was changed or not changed. Some of those could be this is just an update and it has a lot of new features and enhancement. It still needs to go through change control. Impact analysis. When you put this change in, what's your security risk analysis says? Is this a big change that could break everything or a small change? How many testers do we need to test it, right? So when you do an impact analysis, that's going to tell you the risk of that change not working, right? Even though you think it's going to work, when you put it in production, it might not just work at all, right? So that's what the configuration management change control helps you, to do analysis on, all right? The other part of that, access restriction for change, right? And configuration settings. So all those kind of goes together, right? Restrictions, who can do the change, who can automate the change, who's in your DevOps, your SecOps, right? Who has access to those changes. And two is configuration settings. What are there? All right. So if you do a release and you need to roll back because some changes broke their app, what were those original configuration settings in your baseline configuration, right? So, right, what are those settings? A lot of times people can't tell you. People are busy, enhancing it, trying to make the database quicker, trying to make the app server quicker. They're making settings and they forget what they changed, right? So if you don't have changes on that, how do you know when to roll back? So if something got slower or you end up breaking something, right? What's your rollback phase too? I think a lot of people take that for granted once again, right? The configuration management is least functionality, right? Just because you can install a web server, app server, database with all those features, each one of those features are attack vector. So you only want to use the features that you need for your product or program or project or organization to work. Any other functionality is an attack vector if you're not using it, right? And we're going to dig into each one of these a little bit, right? We're not going to get too crazy away, but just talking about configuration management, once again, at a GRC perspective, right? System component inventory, right? You need to know what systems, now we're talking about the components of your inventory, right? So if you need a certain hard drive or a laptop or a disk space, now with the advent of just in time, you can order stuff, and a lot of times your infrastructure spun up in the cloud, so you're not really, keeping track of all those components like you used to, right? But the components you need track of, you need to have an inventory of those. Then what's your configuration management plan? Software usage restrictive. Like for us, you shouldn't be able to download anything in your environment. Only approved software should run in your environment, right? And that's part of the software usage restriction part. And the other part of that is user install software. Can users install software? Hopefully the answer is no. What's up, Ty? Master Jedi, salute. I appreciate it, Ty. Hopefully you're having a good day. It's almost Friday, man. I'm barely making it, but we getting close. So once again, we're going through there. This is huge, right? User install software. I'm always arguing with the development teams. They want to download anything they want. We want to make sure, that software gets approved before it gets used, right? So we got to figure out the balance for each organization and even each division, right? And the other part in there that's highlighted, they don't have check-in. Open source. Can you use it? How do we validate it? How do we scan it for bugs? Once again, how do we accept it? And a lot of software you use that you don't realize it's using open source components in there, right? So you need to figure out, because if something like success or happen, or you need to update because you got open source software in your environment, you need to know which what software is in your environment. So when you see a CVE or a news says we have, I'm trying to think, Java's open source, they start to make you pay for it. Hibernate, Spring, there's a lot of other open source softwares that are widely used out there. You want to know what's in your environment, because if it gets hacked, right, and you need to block it, right? MFT, which is not open source, that's getting a managed file transfer. That's getting a lot of people hacked, and a lot of people, it was embedded in other products they wasn't even aware of, right? So once again, we need to figure out what's in our environment. Information location, data action mapping, signed components. All right. So those are really a nice to have. That's where they're not implemented. I'm big on signed components, meaning when you get in some open source, you sign it with a key so you know nobody's actually messed with it or can inject anything in it, right? You hash one-way sign it so you know if anybody has messed with that. So once again, that's huge. And at the top, we're just talking about some of the configuration and management, security controls, right? And a lot of these are organizational, right? These are usually process and procedures. You get a lot of technically because you're talking about Git, Maven, right? You can check in components and build them, and that'll be your inventory for those components. And we'll talk a little bit about that at the end. All right. See, shout out Ty. Shout out to Morrison. Good afternoon. It's almost evening. I'm running on study sec ops. Shout out to, I like that study sec ops. I need to get back into my dev ops. So that's what I'm trying to get back into. See, Morrison, something happened that delayed your broadcast. Yeah, I was in a bunch of meetings and I was trying to get out. So I apologize. I was a little late. They had a brother working today, man. I was trying to relax in the floor, and I had about 4 meetings, and I'm doing a couple security reviews, and I'm a we were talking about that. Take the companies off, and we're going to walk through some security reviews I've been doing so you can see how it's done in real life, right? So you can see how GRC, and a lot of times I do risk assessment on software coming into a company, agency, or division, right? So we were going over that, and my favorite part is contracts. So I delve in a lot with legal contracts because you have security language in contracts. So they call it security exhibits, and I'm gonna do a video on that. Long story short, I know everybody's getting into security. When you buy something through RFP, RFI, if you buy anything, you need to have security language in there. What if you're a hospital, their product need to be a HIPAA with you. We just talked about FISMA, which is a lot of DOD, so they need to be at the FISMA level, or the NIST. We just looked at low, modern, and high. You need to have security language in your contracts, right? So that company is at the same security level as you are. If they're not, you understand what security level they need to be at. So once again, we'll talk about that in a separate video. So here I'm a NIST guy, and I've been doing this off and on for a decade. And the cool thing about NIST is they have special publication, meaning they delve deeper into things you want. So a lot of times when I'm into something, I grab the special publication. And even if I don't read it all, I at least look at the table of contents. And we're going to do that on here. And it tells you what you should be looking at, right? So here we're looking at configuration management. We're talking about the security focus, NIST 800-128, and I'm gonna have the link in the description. Configuration management of information system. If you looked, it says 2011, but if you looked at the change, they actually updated in 2019. So it's pretty current. I got half my slides done, so we'll look at that. Then we probably jump into the document. PBO was getting beat up today. So let's see what my man got. Man, I'm holding like a hubcap in the fast. Like, I'm with you, man. I've been getting thrown up this week. I'm glad tomorrow's Friday. So I've been doing reverse SSPs and going over contracts and digging in different stuff. So, which is cool though, because a lot of people getting laid off, so I ain't gonna complain too much. So this is what we're gonna look at. Once again, 800-128. Just gonna cruise through it. It's organization applies configuration management. We just looked through the 853 bullet points for configuration management, establishing baseline and for tracking, controlling, managing many aspects of business development, product, service, manufacturing. Organization with a boost and effective CM process needs to consider information security with respect to development of operation systems, including hardware, software, application, and documentation. Configuration management requires the integration of the management of secure configuration into the organizational CM process or processes, right? Then there, I'm gonna jump around, and you said security. Oh, security focused configuration management. They call it SecCM. We always got a new abbreviation. SecCM is used to emphasize the concentration of information security through both IT business function and security focused practices are to be expected, right? Even though you can do a configuration management, now since we have supply chain attacks, cassette attacks, right? You need to figure out your pipeline for configuration management, your DevOps, which part of your DevOps is going to be configuration management. You're going to check those out and build your environment. You're going to static scan, dynamic scan, do an integration test, right? Hopefully you have all your automated tests in there. You're going to build it, approve it, then it's going to get put into production or into QA for you to test it, right? But your configuration management has to be there because you want to make sure all those are your development paths and nobody's from China or Russia stuck something in your code pipeline, right? And the first part of that you start with is configuration management. Weird thing is when I first got on DoD, I hated it. I was on the the QA team, right, and configuration management team. And it was old school. They used to check them in. We used to have to check them out and hand build them. Like, so you had to compile all your Oracle packages, compile all your Java package, compile all your PL SQL packages, right? Then you have developers in 5 different states and you had to build it. But we built it by hand, right? So now most of that's automated. Most of that stuff happens in a blink of an eye. Well, I ain't gonna say the blink of an eye because now you got development test, your division test, integration test. You have API tests. They're calling third parties. Then you're putting it in the cloud, right? So the test is much bigger, but 95% of it's automated, and that's where you want it to be. Once again, you're doing vulnerability scans, builds, integration tests. We call them developer units tests, right? But all of those are, and we're gonna look at them, CIs and configuration points that you need to check and make sure they're secure. Right. So once again, if you got any questions or just any thing, just drop them into the chat and we'll get to them. And in a minute, I'll drop down the link because like I'm at the freestyle. I didn't get out my slides done. It was a rough day. So then 2 is, remember we saw these when we were actually looking at the bullet points in 53. So what is a basic configuration, right? A configuration management has applied to a broad range of products and systems in such areas as automobiles, pharmaceuticals, information technology. Some basic terms associated with configuration management disciplines are briefly explained, right? So what is a CM? Comprised of collection of activities focused on establishing and maintaining, this is big, the integrity of the product and systems through control of the process for initializing, changing, and monitoring configurations for those systems, right? So when you see stuff like Kaseus or hacks or people getting in people's pipelines, configuration management is supposed to, I guess, help stop that and block that, right? In the old days, we used to call those release managers, right? So I used to be a release manager. We compile everything up. Once it looked good and once the business said it was good, I would release it into QA. I would release it into production. Now you got an automatic build with Git, Maven, AWS has their configuration management. Azure has their product in the cloud for their pipelines. You can check in code, right? So once again, most of that's automated, but right, you still got to account for and still make sure you're doing it appropriately, right? The other part of that is configuration items. Is an identifier part of a system. It could be hardware, software, documentation, combination of thereof that is a discrete target of a configuration control process, right? So in the old days, we used to use Oracle database. So a CI could be an index on a table, right? So your CIs could be minute. It could be an index on a table. It could be a constraint, which is like a one line. So each one of those are CIs, and you got to track those. Then two is like they said, when you have a change, how do you approve the change, document the change, and then track it into your production environment or a QA environment? Then the other part of that is we call it traceability. So if you says what qualified this database to get changed, right? So there should be a business case, a test case, right? So you should be able to trace it where this was the new requirement. This is what we had to change. This what got approved. This is how I tested it. This is how it got built. And a lot of times we tag it. Then this is how it got put in production, right? So that's what we call a traceability matrix. Most people don't do that anymore. That's kind of a old school thing till something breaks and we're like, well, who put it in there? Why did he put it in there, right? Configuration management with your traceability should have all of that figured out. Shout out to Casual Economist. So once again, those CIs could be, because like I said, I used to do it for Oracle database. So it's like, what put this index on there, right? It was slow, or we were doing, sometimes it could be actually from the development staff. The query was slow, the index was put on it to speed up, right? That's a architectural change, a system change, but it still should be documented, right? The change was this, it sped up the database, it was created here. And two is a lot of times is how many hours did you work on it? Because how much did that change actually cost the business? And we're going to get to that into the CM, right? But all of that's from configuration management, right? Once again, from that NIST process. So let's keep going. We talked about the baseline. Baseline configuration is a setup, like we talked about, or CIs within the system. This has been formally reviewed, agreed on a given point in time, which has been changed only through change control procedure. The baseline configuration is used as a basis for future builds, releases, and or changes, right? So we call them builds and releases, right? And a lot of times it's a new requirement, new feature, right? But that feature could be a screen, a database change, new bucket in AWS S3 bucket. But what makes up that change is what's that build and what's that release. And once again, what changes were made. And two is you want to track your cost and your time to figure out how much you're paying on that stuff. Then also in there, what's your plan? It's comprehensive description of roles, responsibilities, and policies, right? So you're using GitHub, how are you checking it in? Who's responsible? Is there release management? Senior guys inside your build. And to be honest, this is going to be included in your DevOps. Your configuration code control board, CCB, establish a charter for a group of qualified people with the responsibility of the process of controlling and improving changes throughout the development lifecycle. Configuration item, we talked about that. Methodology for selecting and naming items need to be placed under CM. Controls, configuration change control, process for managing the updates to baselines and configuration items, right? So once again, just what do you need to do configuration management? What's up, Spawn, the programmer? I think I'm getting back to programmer in 2023, man. I'm going to start programming a little more. But once again, we're talking about configuration management. And two, this is part of your DevOps, right? A lot of people talk about DevOps. And two is if you want to get in DevSecOps. So you as a security professional, you need to go through sometimes, and we're going to get through that. Not today, but later on, is how do you take your configuration management plan, your baseline, and map it to production to make sure that you have a traceability matrix. How do you go through and scan the items on there from a DevSecOps for vulnerabilities, right? What's your vulnerability program? Shout out to Simply Cyber, right? What is your, they call it exposure management. So you got a vulnerability, but what items are in that vulnerability and how, from a risk perspective, how much is your company exposed to? Is that risk on the CV a 10-0 or is it 1.2, right? So even though you have vulnerabilities, the next level is exposure management, right? Then two is how much is your organization exposed? And a lot of that starts with configuration management, because you got to know what you got in your environment to figure out what the level of exposure. And two, like we talked about, monitoring process for assessing, testing the levels of compliance with the established baseline configuration and mechanisms for reporting on the configuration status, items placed under your configuration management. So how do you monitoring, right? Part of the monitoring, like we talked about, is what do you have on your, we call them branches in configuration management. So if this is your production branch, how do you say these things are production or in your production environment? Once again, how do you do vulnerability management, exposure management, and some things new to me, which I heard of, but I don't do, is threat hunting, right? So part of threat hunting is configuration management. What versions are you using? Are those versions have vulnerabilities, right? You need to have those under configuration management, again, to figure out what's in your environment and how you are managing your environment, especially, right? We're talking about federal level systems, right? So we need to figure out what that is so we can keep track, because the Fed's gonna come in and do an audit. So, right, so we got to be able to pass the audit. And a lot of times your configuration management is weak in your audit. So let's see what my man Ty's got to say. They're trying to get me out the Fed. Is that good or bad? is that good or bad? Or is that trying to get you out because you're going to get promotion to CISO, Ty? Or are they trying to push you out in a bad way? Be careful out here, man. A lot of people getting laid off. So then let's talk about this new term, security-focused set configuration management, right? So it's a management and control of secure configurations for a system to enable security and facilitate the management of risks. The security CM builds on a general concept, process, and activities of configuration management by action on implementation and maintenance of established security requirements and organizational systems. All right. So once again, security and configuration management. Once again, that's the next level. Once we get our configuration plan done, we get it tested out, and we got our pipeline built. Whatever goes through your pipeline is going to go through configuration, right? You know, check it in, and you're going to build, and then once again, do your dynamic scans, your static scans. But from a security perspective, how are you making sure the right developer is checking in those CI items? How are you using keys, or I know you're using passwords? Everybody's working remote, so you're saying only this IP VPN can check in a CI, right? So what is the security around your configuration management? So information security configuration management requires integrating into existing organizational configuration management. Once again, it could be business, application projects, information systems. The SecCM activities include identification and recording of configuration that impact the security posture of the system and organization, consideration of security risk and approval of the internal configuration, the analysis of security implication of the change to the system configuration, and documentation. We talked about that, approval of the implemented changes. Right, and we're gonna dig into right. So when the architect builds the system, right? I'm an AWS guy, so you got a 3-tier network, you got some databases, some app server, web server, right? Each one of those has a security component to it, right? Is it at the right version? What's the risk of it? Is there any CVEs for it? Is it documented, right? A lot of times you need documentation because somebody gets sick, somebody get fired, right? You need to have somebody to be able to work on it. I think we take for granted a lot of times that the certain person's going to be around to work on it, right? That could not be true sometimes. So once again, we're just going to talk about it. And two is we're talking about the GRC of that. So of course, we're going to have planning, identifying, implementing configuration management, controlling configuration changes, and we talked about monitoring, right? So those are the 3 things we need in there, right, to make those happen. So I'm gonna switch over once again. I was stuck some meeting, so let's jump over to the actual NIST document for that and kind of figure that out on the fly. There it is. Just make sure everybody can see it. So once again, we're gonna fly to the top and just kind of go through the table of contents real quick. We were right there. We were just talking about the flow. And at the end of planning, implementing, controlling, and the secure monitoring, and SCAP, right? Security Control Automation Protocol, right? So how do you secure and how do you automate that and how do you build it? So real quick, I'm just going to slide to the bottom of this document. This is stuff I hate doing a lot of, is though, but it's necessary. He gives you a sample of security impact analysis template, right? So a lot of people say, well, how do you do risk and how do you do it from configuration standpoint? They give you the template, right? Of course, this is for big companies. I would strip it down from a smaller company, right? But you got project type, if it's new development, enhancements, or maintenance, right? Plan date, deployment date, current security, right? Impact the systems. Each system had names, but this is kind of the blueprint to kind of walk you through it too. We talked about changes, and when you talk about configuration management, it's everything from firewalls to VPN, network, new OS, COTS packages, right? Packages already built, databases. Each one of those should have a configuration when you use them. When you build a SQL server, right? There's a configuration file. Do you have encryption? All that should be checked in. So when you do your enhancement or build, once again, you know what your baseline is, right? In device impact worksheet, of course, you got to test it all. Because you always have the big dog sign it, right? So two is it gives you. We looked at the security families, right? So these security families that kind of weigh into configuration management at a high level, right? But once again, this is NIST special publication 800-128, right? For secure configuration management. Like I see, I'm kind of flowing through it. PBO didn't get his slides done today. He didn't do a good job, but we're gonna go through. We're gonna get through it, right? So here's a sample change request. Once again, we looked at it. You see it right there, but when you get to a certain level and a certain maturity, you want to have repeatable processes, right? This is part of your repeatable processes, these changes and this focus right here, right? So let's see, I'm gonna drop the link, like, so I'm once again, if you got any questions, IT or cybersecurity or GRC, just put them in the box. Let's see, we're gonna look at a couple more things. That's the plan. So it's been a long day for me. So let's look at just automation of a few things. That's kind of what I'm gonna wrap up on, is the automation. So let's look at the SCAP of the assessment and reporting. So the SCAP would go through and do an analysis to see what you have an error on. See at the top, monitoring and accomplishments of assessment and reporting. The organization with the large number of components, the only practical and effective way of XCM monitor activities is use an automated solution, right? So if you're on Linux, a lot of times you do SCAP, and you can actually run SCAP on Amazon Linux too. But usually if I'm on Amazon and I didn't get to do slides for it, I apologize. It's their system manager. Their system manager will go through and run it to tell you what components needs to be updated, right, on that. So that's kind of it in a nutshell, right? So you want to implement non-destructive remediation action. You want to send alert to with change detail to appropriate staff. You want to be able to roll back changes and restore from backup. Updating the inventory to include newly identified components, who made the change and whether they made the change. And once again, if you want to do DevSecOps, I think configuration management is definitely a step in the right direction to getting into DevSecOps, right? So once again, I'm gonna switch back over to the slide showing we're gonna roll up to once again, we're just gonna kind of end on that. Once again, I just want to talk about high level GRC, what you needed for a documentation. The two is I'm gonna start showing you how to use these in AWS and how do you use configuration management. The services inside AWS to actually implement configuration management for our NIST. But once again, you see it right there. You got low, medium, high. Those are all the configuration management controls. And you can see, once again, if you're high, you're implementing the majority of those controls, right? Then two, from a GRC perspective, I review on-site development staff to make sure they're doing configuration management appropriately, right? And these are the things I'm looking for to make sure that company or the development teams are implementing those in a certain way. If they're not, right, that's a gap, vulnerability, or something they need to fix, right? And then two is I give them a CAP, which stands for continuous access program, meaning stuff they need to fix to get compliant. Once again, so I was just gonna do something short today. Happy Thursday. I'm calling TGIF that it's Friday already because I'm wrapping up for today. Once again, that's all I had. I'll hang out and see if anybody had any questions. I'll probably start going live a little more, and I'll make sure I have my slides done next time. Two is, I talk a little bit about everything. So my next thing is the 5 things I would do if I was starting over, right? For y'all, I'm sure we had a new people on. I taught for 10 years at a community college. I've actually been in security for 15 years. I've been in IT for 35 years. I'll be 55 this year. So I got my bachelor's in computer science in 1990. I actually started my first intern in 1988. I was working on an IBM mainframe tape doing JCL, which is job control language. So I've been in this game a very, very long time. So once again, I think I'm out. I think I'm gonna take a break. It's been a long day. You'll see me up do more videos, and I see most of y'all out and about in these cybersecurity streets. If you need anything, just reach out to me, Professor Black Ops at gmail.com. Give me a couple days to answer the email. I'm usually up ahead on my emails. Once again, everybody have a great day. Professor Black Ops, please subscribe.